It was just after 6 in the evening, and the streets were slowly filling with cars returning home from work. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the air carried the faint smell of rain from earlier in the day. She drove steadily, her hands gripping the steering wheel with a quiet confidence. After a long day at the base, she was looking forward to a warm dinner and a quiet evening at home. Her uniform was neatly pressed under her jacket, a silent reminder of years of discipline and service. As she made her way down the familiar roads, a police car appeared in her rearview mirror. The flashing lights were sudden and unexpected. She sighed but stayed calm, carefully pulling over to the side of the road. She turned off the engine and waited. The officer walked up slowly, his shoes clicking against the wet pavement, and there was a sharpness in his eyes that made her heart rate rise just slightly. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, his tone more commanding than polite. She looked at him calmly and shook her head. "No, officer. I'm not sure." The officer leaned closer to the window, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "You were speeding. License and registration, please." She reached for her wallet and handed him the documents without a word. Her movements were deliberate, careful. She had been through situations like this before. Not often, but enough to know that being polite, calm, and collected was the best approach. She met his eyes through the mirror, noticing the suspicion and something else, something unspoken. The officer took her documents and returned to his car, speaking into the radio as if reporting some kind of crime. Minutes felt long, and she could feel the tension building. She could hear him muttering, his tone not meant for her ears, and it made her stomach tighten. It was a small reminder of the reality she faced every day, the quiet injustices that many dismissed until they happened to them. When he returned, he leaned slightly on her car, the badge on his chest catching the fading sunlight. "Do you work around here?" he asked, a question that seemed harmless but carried an undertone she had heard too many times before. "Yes, officer. I just finished a long day at work," she replied evenly. She could feel the way he looked at her, sizing her up as if he didn't quite believe her. He paused, then gave a short nod. "You seem a little tense. Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was calm but firm. She knew that any sign of fear or anger could be used against her in these situations, just ready to get home. The officer squinted, his gaze shifting from her face to the documents in his hand and back again. There was a sense of frustration in him, an impatience that seemed to grow the longer he spoke. He made a few comments about driving carefully and following the rules of the road, but the words carried a different weight than their meaning. There was a subtle judgment there, a belief that she was someone who needed correction, someone he could assert authority over. She listened patiently, nodding when appropriate, but inside she was aware of the pattern. She had faced moments like this in her life, moments where her presence alone seemed to make some people uncomfortable, and yet, she reminded herself, this was not a time for confrontation. This was a time for composure, for letting her actions and demeanor speak louder than any words could. Finally, the officer leaned back slightly. "Do you have anything in your car I should know about?" He asked a standard question, but with an edge. "No, officer. Just my personal belongings," she said, keeping her tone even. She could see his eyes narrowing slightly as if he didn't quite believe her. She wondered what assumptions he had already made, what stories he had already told himself before ever pulling her over. The tension between them was thick, like a weight pressing down on the small space of the car, and the officer's body leaning against it. She could feel the exhaustion of the day in her bones, but she also felt a quiet strength, a reminder of the training and discipline that had carried her through tougher situations in the past. She was aware that every moment mattered, that the way she responded could make the difference between a minor encounter and something more serious. After a few more moments, the officer sighed and straightened up. "You're lucky it's not worse. Make sure to follow the speed limits." His tone was a mix of warning and authority, but there was something else there too. A hint of hesitation, a sense that something about her had unsettled him. "Thank you, officer." "I will," she said politely. She watched him for a moment as he walked back to his car, the fluorescent lights on the roof reflecting off the wet pavement. When he got inside and started writing something, she felt a wave of relief mixed with lingering tension. As the officer prepared to leave, she took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed softly, a comforting sound after the tight silence of the stop. She drove slowly at first, her mind replaying the encounter, analyzing every glance, every word. She thought about how often these moments happened, how often assumptions were made before people were even known. And she reminded herself that she had handled it well, that her calm and confidence had guided the situation to a safe end. The drive home was quiet, the streets bathed in the glow of streetlights reflecting off the damp pavement. She thought about the importance of patience, the importance of maintaining dignity even when confronted with bias. She knew that tomorrow she would wear her uniform again, walk into her office and continue her duties with the same focus and determination. But she also knew that moments like this were reminders of the work that remained, not just in her own life, but in the lives of so many others who faced similar encounters. When she finally pulled into her driveway, she paused for a moment, letting the car idle as she collected herself. The house was quiet, the familiar walls offering comfort and safety. She stepped out of the car, closing the door softly behind her, and took a deep breath of the evening air. The tension of the day began to melt, replaced by a sense of calm and accomplishment. She had faced a challenging situation with grace, and that was something to carry with her into the evening. Inside, she hung her jacket carefully, straightened her uniform, and prepared to unwind. The encounter with the officer was behind her, but it would not be forgotten. It was a reminder of the strength she carried, the composure she maintained, and the courage required to navigate a world that sometimes judged too quickly and unfairly. She poured herself a cup of tea, the warmth spreading through her hands and chest, and allowed herself a small smile. Even though the day had ended with tension, she felt proud. Proud of her response, proud of the discipline that guided her, and proud of the person she was beyond assumptions and judgments. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she could rest in the quiet knowledge that she had handled the evening with calm and dignity, and that was more than enough. The next morning, she woke early, the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains. The house was quiet, almost serene, but the memory of the previous evening's traffic stop lingered in her mind. It was a small encounter, yet it carried weight. The way the officer had looked at her, the subtle tension in his voice, the judgment hidden behind polite words, it all stayed with her. She sipped her coffee slowly, thinking about how easy it was for people to make assumptions, and how much patience it took to handle those moments with composure. She dressed carefully, her uniform neat and precise, reflecting the discipline she had cultivated over years of service. Each button fastened, each crease in place felt like armor. Today would be another busy day at work, but she carried the quiet confidence that had helped her navigate yesterday's challenge. As she prepared to leave, she reminded herself that the world often saw her through the wrong lens. People saw skin color first, accomplishments later. That realization made her pause, a quiet reminder of why moments like the stop mattered, and why her calm response had been so important. The drive to work was calm, but her mind wandered back to the officer. She replayed the encounter in her head, noticing the little things she had not paid attention to in the moment. The way he hesitated when she spoke clearly, the subtle shift in his posture, the way his eyes narrowed as if trying to assert control. She had faced people like this before, but each encounter was different. Some could be diffused with calm words, some required strength of presence, and some lingered as reminders that the world was still learning how to treat others fairly. By the time she arrived at the base, she had shifted her focus. Her day was full of meetings, reports, and overseeing a team of soldiers, all of whom relied on her guidance and leadership. She moved through her responsibilities with precision, giving instructions, reviewing plans, and offering support where needed. Her colleagues respected her, not only for her rank but for her experience, insight, and calm demeanor. Every interaction reminded her of the importance of leadership that combined strength with understanding, discipline with compassion. Despite the busy day, the memory of the officer's attitude returned in small moments. A casual comment from a colleague, a car passing by that reminded her of the stop, even the tone of a message on her phone. It was subtle but persistent, a reminder that bias was often quiet, hidden behind polite words or authority. She realized that encounters like these were not just personal. They were a reflection of larger patterns in society. They were moments that required not anger or confrontation, but awareness, strength, and resilience. Around midday, she stepped outside for a brief walk. The sun was higher now, warming her face, and the air carried the sounds of distant traffic and the quiet hum of life on the base. She found a small bench under a tree and sat down, letting her thoughts settle. The stop from yesterday had been unnerving, but she also felt a sense of pride in how she had handled it. She had remained composed, respectful and confident even when faced with subtle hostility. That was her strength. That was her preparation for life in a world where assumptions often preceded understanding. As she walked back into her office, she noticed a few colleagues whispering, glancing her way with curiosity. She smiled politely, focusing on her work, but she could sense the energy in the room, people noticing, people observing. It reminded her that leadership was not only about managing tasks, but also about setting an example. Her calm, composed handling of yesterday's situation was a lesson in itself, though few would know the details. She carried that awareness quietly, like a shield, guiding her actions throughout the day. Later, in a meeting with senior officers, the topic shifted to public interactions and community relations. She listened closely, her mind reflecting on the previous evening. The discussions were about protocols, communication strategies, and the importance of fairness. She realized that what she experienced yesterday was precisely why such training mattered. Bias could exist in small, subtle ways, and yet it had the power to affect lives deeply. Her own experience was a reminder that empathy, awareness, and proper conduct were critical not just in military service, but in every interaction with the public. After the meeting, she returned to her office, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She had spent the morning handling responsibilities, the afternoon reflecting on broader issues, and now the evening approached, promising a return to home and quiet. Yet her mind remained alert, aware that the world outside could still be unpredictable. She reviewed documents, signed forms, and planned the upcoming training schedule, her attention to detail unwavering. Every action reinforced the discipline she had cultivated, the ability to remain steady under pressure. By the late afternoon, the day's intensity began to ease. She walked to the small parking lot outside her office, noting the fading sunlight and the gentle hum of traffic in the distance. As she approached her car, her thoughts drifted back to yesterday's encounter. She remembered the officer's subtle judgment, his assumptions, and how easily someone could misinterpret who she was. But she also remembered her own reaction, calm, collected, confident. That memory gave her a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had managed a potentially difficult situation with dignity and intelligence. Driving home that evening, she reflected on the lessons of the day. Leadership was not just about authority. It was about how you handled unexpected challenges. It was about maintaining respect for yourself while navigating the judgments and biases of others. She thought about the countless people who faced similar encounters daily, whose calm and courage often went unnoticed. She felt a sense of responsibility to carry her experience forward, to serve as an example quietly but powerfully of how to respond with strength and dignity. When she arrived home, the familiar streets offered comfort, but the world outside remained unpredictable. She parked her car and stepped out, feeling the cool evening air on her face. She walked inside her home, greeted by quiet walls and the soft lighting of a comfortable space. The day's work was done, but the reflections continued. She thought about the officer, the subtle tensions, the assumptions, and the small victories of composure and self-respect. Each moment of calm she maintained was a statement, a quiet reminder that strength often spoke louder than words. As she settled in for the evening, she took a moment to review her plans for the week, her responsibilities, and her personal goals. Yet in the back of her mind, the encounter from yesterday lingered, a subtle but persistent reminder of the world's realities. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate patience, wisdom, and courage. And she knew that every interaction mattered. Every response shaped not only her experience but also the perception and actions of those around her. She poured herself a cup of tea, letting the warmth spread through her hands and chest. The quiet comfort of her home contrasted with the tension she had felt the day before, but she welcomed it. It was a reminder of balance, strength in the face of challenge, peace after confrontation. She allowed herself a moment of reflection, thinking about the larger patterns of bias and prejudice, and how her calm composure had made a difference, however small. Finally, as night fell, she prepared for rest, her mind still alert but her body ready for sleep. The lessons of the day were clear. Awareness, patience, and dignity were essential tools for navigating a world that often judged too quickly. She had handled a difficult encounter with grace, and that was a victory in itself. The officer's assumptions had been challenged, her presence had spoken volumes, and her calm had been her greatest ally. Lying in bed, she allowed herself a small smile, thinking about the quiet power of composure and confidence. She had faced bias, subtle and overt, with dignity, and had maintained control of the situation. She knew that tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new interactions, and perhaps new challenges. But she also knew that she carried the tools to handle them, the patience, the discipline, and the quiet strength that had guided her through every difficult encounter. The night was still, peaceful yet full of reflection. She closed her eyes, letting the events of the day settle into memory, ready to be carried forward as lessons and reminders. She had faced the subtle prejudice of the world, and she had faced it well. That quiet victory, small but significant, gave her confidence, strength, and hope for the days to come. The evening was calm, but the memory of the previous encounter with the officer still lingered in her mind. She had thought about it all day, the way he had spoken to her, the subtle tone in his voice, and the assumptions he had clearly made about her. Driving home now, she felt a mixture of resolve and quiet frustration. It was not anger that fueled her, but awareness. She knew the world often saw her first by the color of her skin, before recognizing her accomplishments or her service. Yet she also knew that moments like this were opportunities to show dignity, calm, and strength. As she pulled into a well-lit intersection, the same police car appeared again, though she hadn't been speeding this time. She slowed her car, her eyes meeting the officer's through the windshield. He gestured for her to pull over, and she complied immediately, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. The officer approached, and she noticed something different in his demeanor. There was hesitation now, a slight uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice less confident than before. "License and registration, please." She reached into her wallet and handed him the documents. She kept her expression calm, neutral, and steady. Inside, she was alert, ready for anything, but externally she gave nothing away. She had learned that composure was often the best response in situations where authority met assumption. The officer glanced at the documents, then back at her. His eyes lingered for a moment longer than necessary. There was a flicker of recognition, as if something was not quite right. "Do you work in the area?" he asked cautiously, trying to mask the surprise in his voice. "Yes, officer. I'm just heading home from work," she replied evenly, giving no hint of irritation. She noticed the subtle shift in his body language, the tension in his shoulders, the slight stammer in his words, and the way he fumbled with his pen for a moment. Something about her had unsettled him, and she remained calm, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat longer than comfortable. The officer cleared his throat. I just want to remind you to drive safely." His tone was uncertain now, and his eyes briefly flickered down at the badge on her documents. But still he said nothing about her rank. He seemed to sense that this encounter was different from the typical stop he made on a busy road. She kept her hands on the wheel and nodded. "I appreciate that, officer. I always follow the rules of the road." Her tone was polite but firm. There was an unmistakable confidence in her voice that demanded respect without raising her tone. He hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. "Do you carry identification besides this?" he asked finally, as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the assumptions he had already made. She could see the uncertainty in his eyes. There was no anger, just confusion and perhaps a hint of embarrassment. "Yes," she replied softly, reaching into her bag. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out an official military ID and handed it to him. She didn't announce her rank immediately. She simply let the card speak for itself. The officer's eyes widened ever so slightly as he took the ID in his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. For a moment he was speechless. The words caught somewhere between recognition and disbelief. "Colonel?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The word sounded strange coming from him, almost like a question he didn't expect to ask. She nodded once calmly. "Yes, officer. I am a colonel in the United States Army." She kept her tone steady, almost conversational, letting the revelation settle naturally into the quiet space between them. The officer blinked, taking a step back. His body language had changed completely. The arrogance and assumption he had carried moments before had evaporated, replaced by a mix of shock and sudden humility. For the first time, he truly saw her, not just as a black woman, not just as a driver pulled over, but as a leader, someone with years of service, discipline, and authority. I didn't realize," he stammered, fumbling with the ID in his hands as if holding it might somehow explain everything. He avoided direct eye contact, his earlier confidence completely gone. She stayed composed, giving him space to process the moment. "I understand, officer. I know it can be surprising when people make assumptions. It happens more often than you might think." Her words were calm, gentle, but carried an undeniable strength. She didn't scold or accuse him. She simply stated a truth that required acknowledgement. He swallowed hard, still avoiding her gaze. "And I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable," he said finally. The words were awkward, not rehearsed, but they were sincere. He seemed to understand at least partially the weight of what had just happened. "It's all right," she replied. "What matters is that we handle situations with respect, no matter the assumptions we start with." She smiled slightly, not mockingly, but in a way that conveyed composure and assurance. There was no need for anger here. Dignity and calm were far more powerful. The officer nodded slowly, still holding the ID. He seemed to be reflecting on the encounter, perhaps recognizing his own biases and the assumptions he had made in mere moments. There was a subtle humility in him now, a quiet acknowledgement that he had been wrong to judge her before knowing who she was. You're a colonel," he repeated, almost to himself, as if saying it out loud helped him process it. I didn't expect." His words trailed off, the sentence unfinished, the thought incomplete. She maintained eye contact, letting the silence fill the space. Sometimes words were unnecessary. The lesson was clear. Assumptions can be dangerous, but calm confidence can shift the balance. She had faced prejudice before, and she knew the power of dignity and composure in moments like these. The officer finally straightened, taking a step back. "Thank you for showing patience. I should have treated you differently from the start." His voice was quieter now, more reflective. There was no pretense, no attempt to assert authority over her. He seemed genuinely humbled, realizing that the woman before him was not defined by assumptions or appearances. She nodded once, offering a polite smile. "It's never too late to treat someone with respect, officer. That's all anyone asks." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. They were a reminder of what it meant to face bias calmly and with confidence, to let composure speak louder than accusations or anger. The air between them felt lighter now, the tension of the encounter dissipating. The officer handed back her documents, his movements slower, more careful. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between them. The encounter had changed something, however subtly, in both of their perceptions. "Drive safely, ma'am," he said, his tone now respectful, lacking the arrogance of before. He gave a small nod, almost hesitant, and stepped back toward his car. She watched him go, noticing the change in his posture, the absence of the judgmental energy that had been so strong earlier. She started the engine, the hum of the car a comforting sound after the tension-filled moments. Driving away, she reflected on what had just happened. The encounter had been more than a traffic stop. It had been a lesson in awareness, a moment where composure and dignity had shifted perceptions. She thought about how often such moments occurred in the lives of people who faced prejudice and bias, and how essential it was to meet them with calm strength. As she drove home, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. She allowed herself a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had handled a difficult encounter with grace. She had faced assumptions and prejudice without losing composure or self-respect. And she had shown, without anger or confrontation, the strength and confidence that came from years of discipline and service. By the time she reached her driveway, the world seemed calmer, the tension of the evening fading. She parked her car, taking a moment to gather herself before stepping out. The air was cool and quiet, a gentle contrast to the intensity of the encounter. She walked inside, feeling the comfort of her home wrap around her. The evening offered time for reflection. She thought about the officer, about how quickly assumptions can form and how easily bias can influence behavior. But she also thought about her own response, calm, measured, confident. She realized that moments like these, while stressful, were opportunities to teach, to model strength and to demonstrate dignity in the face of ignorance. She sat quietly in her living room, letting the events of the day settle. The stop had been more than a traffic interaction. It had been a reflection of broader societal issues, a reminder of the power of composure, and a testament to the strength of character. She allowed herself a deep breath, feeling the tension ease from her shoulders. She had faced bias and assumptions and had come through with grace intact. Finally, as night deepened, she prepared for rest. She reflected on the lessons of the encounter, on the subtle power of presence and dignity. The world could be quick to judge, quick to assume, but strength often spoke louder than words. She had met prejudice with calm, authority with patience, and ignorance with quiet confidence. As she lay down, the events of the day replayed in her mind not as moments of fear or anger, but as moments of clarity and strength. She had navigated a difficult situation with poise, and the lessons of composure, patience, and dignity would stay with her. The night was peaceful, but the memory of the encounter remained, a reminder of the power of calm in a world quick to judge. The next morning began quietly. The world outside her window still bathed in the soft gray light of dawn. She had barely slept the night before, not because she was restless, but because her mind replayed the events of the previous evening. The encounter with the officer had left a mark. Not a negative one, but a reminder of how quickly assumptions could cloud judgment, and how patience and composure could reveal the truth. She sipped her coffee slowly, letting the warmth settle in her hands, reflecting on the lessons she had learned. Her thoughts wandered back to the officer's reaction the night before. How quickly he had shifted from arrogance to hesitation, from assumptions to uncertainty. It was a striking reminder of how bias could influence behavior without people even realizing it. She knew that for him the interaction had been unexpected. He had never anticipated that the woman in front of him was someone with authority, discipline, and years of experience leading others. It was clear that recognition alone was not enough. Humility and reflection were necessary for real understanding. She dressed for the day, her uniform neat and precise, every crease in place. The discipline she carried was not just for show. It was a reflection of her inner strength, a quiet armor she relied on in moments when composure mattered most. Today, she would continue her duties as a colonel, leading her team with focus, precision, and care. But she also carried with her the awareness that encounters like the one with the officer were reminders of broader societal patterns, and that every interaction offered a chance to model patience, strength, and respect. As she drove to the base, her mind remained alert. The streets were busier than usual, filled with cars and people returning from errands or heading to work. She noticed the small details, the way pedestrians moved, the rhythm of traffic lights, the subtle cues that signaled attention or distraction. Her eyes scanned the road carefully, but her mind often returned to the memory of the officer's eyes. The moment when recognition had met surprise, when arrogance had given way to hesitation. It was a moment she would not forget, a reminder of how often assumptions went unchecked in daily life. Arriving at the base, she was greeted by the usual bustle of activity. Soldiers moved quickly, carrying out their duties with focus and discipline. She nodded to several of them, acknowledging their efforts, but her mind still lingered on the events outside the base walls. Leadership, she reminded herself, was not only about command within the confines of a military operation. It was also about composure, fairness, and empathy in everyday interactions. The stop with the officer had reinforced that lesson in a very personal way. Throughout the morning, she attended meetings, reviewed reports, and spoke with her team. Yet her thoughts occasionally drifted back to the stop. She thought about the officer's hesitation, the subtle shift in his demeanor, and how quickly he had tried to regain control of the situation. It was a human reaction, confusion, embarrassment, and the need to reassert authority. But it also highlighted the importance of awareness and reflection. She realized that while she had handled the encounter well, the responsibility for change extended beyond her alone. The officer's behavior reflected broader societal patterns, and only through reflection and education could those patterns shift. During a mid-morning break, she stepped outside for a short walk. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of flowers from nearby gardens. She found a quiet spot under a tree, letting the sunlight warm her face. She thought about the power of presence, the way calm composure and confidence could influence others. The encounter with the officer had been a demonstration of that power, Without raising her voice or displaying anger, she had revealed the truth of who she was. The lesson was subtle but profound. Dignity and patience could speak louder than confrontation. As she walked back to her office, she reflected further. It was not enough for one person to act with integrity. Change required awareness from those around them. The officer, in that brief interaction, had a choice. He could continue assuming and judging, or he could pause and reconsider his assumptions. She had given him that pause, the space to reflect, and it was now up to him to recognize the impact of his actions. The encounter had been a test of composure, but it was also a lesson in accountability, both for herself and for others. By late afternoon, the base had quieted slightly. She returned to her office to review training schedules and upcoming assignments. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, some casual, some related to operational details. She responded methodically, maintaining focus while allowing her mind to continue processing the encounter. Reflection was a part of discipline, she reminded herself. Every moment of awareness strengthened her ability to handle the next challenge with poise and clarity. While reviewing a set of reports, she paused and leaned back in her chair. The memory of the officer's initial arrogance and subsequent hesitation played again in her mind. She thought about how easy it was for people to misjudge others based on appearances. She also considered the responsibility of those in positions of authority to be fair, patient, and aware of their own biases. The officer's reaction was human, but it was also a reflection of systemic patterns she had witnessed before. Her calm handling of the encounter had created a space for him to recognize his error, but the responsibility for learning remained with him. Later, as the day wound down, she prepared to leave the base. The streets outside were busy with evening traffic, the hum of engines and chatter of pedestrians filling the air. She drove carefully, her thoughts still reflecting on the earlier encounter. She considered how many people faced similar moments daily, moments where assumptions were made before understanding, where bias influenced behavior unconsciously. Her own response had been a demonstration of strength and dignity, and she hoped that the officer, and anyone else observing, might learn from it. Arriving home, she felt the familiar sense of comfort that her house provided. The soft lighting, quiet rooms, and familiar surroundings created a space where she could relax and reflect without distraction. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, letting the warmth seep through her hands. Her mind replayed the events of the day, not as a source of stress, but as an opportunity to consider broader lessons. She thought about patience, humility, and the subtle power of presence. The officer had seen only one side of her at first, but through composure and dignity, she had revealed the truth of her character. The evening allowed her time for reflection on personal and professional growth. She considered how encounters like the one with the officer were opportunities to model behavior, to demonstrate how to respond to prejudice calmly and confidently. She also thought about the importance of empathy and awareness, both for herself and for those around her. Every interaction carried the potential to teach, to influence, and to shift perceptions. She had learned this lesson in a very personal way, and she understood its broader implications. As night fell, she moved through her evening routine, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had faced an encounter rooted in bias, and she had responded with patience, calm, and dignity. She had not allowed assumptions or judgment to dictate her behavior. Instead, she had maintained control of the situation, using her composure as a tool for influence and understanding. The officer's reaction had shifted, subtle but significant, and it was a reminder of the impact that calm, confident presence could have on others. Before heading to bed, she reflected once more on the lessons of the day. Bias and assumptions were persistent challenges, but they could be addressed through awareness, patience, and dignity. She had demonstrated those qualities in a real-world situation, and the effect had been tangible. The officer had experienced a moment of reflection, a pause that could influence his behavior in the future. Her own composure had reinforced her confidence and strengthened her sense of self. Finally, as she settled into bed, she allowed herself a deep breath of relief. The day had been long, filled with reflection and responsibility, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had navigated the encounter with grace, maintained her dignity, and reinforced the importance of composure in the face of bias. The lessons would stay with her, guiding her in future interactions and reinforcing the principles she had relied on throughout her career. As sleep approached, she allowed herself a sense of peace. The encounter with the officer, though brief, had been significant. It had been a demonstration of the power of calm, a lesson in patience, and a reminder that dignity could influence even the most unexpected situations. She closed her eyes, ready to face the next day with the same composure, strength, and quiet confidence that had guided her through every challenge, both small and significant. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the quiet streets, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. She woke early, as she always did, her mind alert but calm. The events of the past few days, the traffic stop, the officer's assumptions, the subtle tension of that evening, still lingered in her thoughts. But unlike before, these thoughts carried a sense of reflection and quiet strength. She had handled a challenging situation with patience and dignity, and now it was time to think about the lessons she could carry forward. She dressed carefully in her uniform, each crease and button in place. The discipline she maintained was more than appearance. It was a reflection of her mindset. Today would be another day of leadership, responsibility, and awareness. And she approached it with the same quiet confidence that had guided her through the previous encounters. Her coffee was warm in her hands, a small comfort as she considered the significance of her actions. Small moments, she reminded herself, could have a big impact, not only on others but on herself as well. The drive to the base was peaceful, the morning air cool and fresh. She noticed the small details around her, the gentle sway of trees along the streets, the rhythm of traffic moving steadily, and the faces of pedestrians carrying on with their routines. Her mind, however, was focused on reflection. The officer's reaction the night before had shown her something important. People often judge before they understand, but patience, calm, and clarity could shift perceptions. She had experienced that power firsthand, and it left a lasting impression. Arriving at the base, she was greeted by her team, who moved with purpose and efficiency. Soldiers nodded respectfully as she passed, and she offered small gestures of acknowledgement in return. Leadership, she reminded herself, was more than giving orders. It was about presence, example, and calm confidence. She carried the memory of the traffic stop with her, not as a burden, but as a lesson in composure and integrity. Her team sensed her focus, her quiet strength, and responded with dedication and attentiveness. The morning was filled with meetings, briefings, and planning sessions. She led with clarity, giving instructions and guidance while remaining approachable, yet her mind occasionally returned to the encounter with the officer. She reflected on his reactions, the hesitation, the surprise, the subtle shift in authority, and recognized that such moments were rare but powerful. They reminded her that calm and dignity could influence others in ways that anger or confrontation rarely could. Each moment carried potential to teach, to change, to leave an impression, whether noticed immediately or not. During a short break, she stepped outside, the warm sunlight bathing her in comfort. She leaned against a railing and took a deep breath, letting her mind settle. She thought about the subtle ways assumptions shaped behavior in society, and how often people acted before truly understanding the situation. She realized that her response had demonstrated strength not by force but by presence, composure, and awareness. She had shown that authority, discipline, and experience spoke for themselves, without the need for argument or aggression. Returning to her office, she reviewed the day's schedule and upcoming plans. There was a quiet sense of satisfaction in her thoughts. She had navigated the encounter successfully, and her reflection was not just about personal accomplishment, but also about the broader impact. Even the officer, in his subtle humility and recognition, had been influenced. He had been forced to reconsider assumptions, to pause and to see beyond initial judgments. It was a reminder that small actions, when guided by patience and dignity, could ripple outward in meaningful ways. By the afternoon, she decided to take a short drive. The streets were busier now, filled with people heading home from errands or work. As she drove, she reflected on the importance of awareness in daily life. Each person she encountered had a story, a background, and experiences she could not see at first glance. She understood how quickly judgment could occur, and how critical it was to meet the world with composure and understanding. The officer's moment of realization the night before had reinforced that lesson profoundly. She parked near a quiet park and stepped out, letting the warm air wash over her. Children played in the distance, their laughter bright and carefree, Adults walked dogs or jogged along the paths, absorbed in their routines. She found a bench under a large oak tree and sat quietly, allowing herself to reflect further. She thought about the encounter, the officer, and the subtle tension that had transformed into understanding. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one, a demonstration of patience, dignity, and quiet influence. The thought of the officer's reaction made her smile softly. For just a moment, he had realized that assumptions could be wrong, that appearances were not the full story, and that respect was earned not through fear, but through composure and clarity. She had not raised her voice or argued. She had simply been herself, confident, disciplined, and calm. And in that simplicity, she had created change. It was a lesson she knew she would carry with her, a reminder of the power of quiet strength. As she walked back to her car, she considered the broader implications. Encounters like hers with the officer were common, though often unnoticed or dismissed. Yet each interaction held potential, to teach, to influence, to shift perspectives. She thought about those who might face bias or assumptions daily, and how composure, patience, and dignity could serve as powerful tools. She felt a sense of responsibility not only to herself, but also to those who could learn from her example. Driving home, she allowed her mind to wander through reflection and observation. The streets were alive with motion, but she remained focused on awareness, noticing small interactions between people, gestures of kindness, and moments of patience. She recognized that life was a series of encounters, each with its own lessons and opportunities. Her experience with the officer had been one such moment, a challenge met with composure, a lesson imparted through quiet strength, and a reminder that assumptions were often incomplete. Arriving home, she parked her car and stepped out, the evening air cool and soothing. She walked inside her house and was greeted by the quiet warmth of familiar surroundings. She set down her bag and allowed herself to relax, thinking back over the past few days. The traffic stop, the officer's assumptions, and the subtle shift in his demeanor had all combined into a powerful reflection on human behavior, patience, and dignity. She had learned much, and she also hoped that the officer had learned too. Sitting by the window with a cup of tea, she reflected on the lessons she had absorbed. She thought about the importance of maintaining composure, the power of presence, and the value of patience in moments of tension. She realized that dignity and quiet confidence often spoke louder than words or force. Her experience had reinforced that lesson in a very real and personal way, and it would guide her in every encounter going forward. She considered the broader impact of such encounters. How many people experienced bias daily, assumptions made before understanding? How many needed patience, calm, and composure to navigate a world that judged too quickly? She understood that while one encounter might seem small, the ripple effect could be significant. By handling situations with clarity and dignity, she had created space for reflection, learning, and potential change. As night fell, she prepared for rest. Her body was tired from the day's responsibilities, but her mind remained alert, filled with reflection and awareness. She thought again of the officer, of his hesitation, of the moment when recognition replaced assumption. It was a small victory, a quiet but meaningful shift, and it reinforced the principles she had relied on throughout her career: patience, dignity, composure, and quiet strength. Lying in bed, she allowed herself a deep breath of satisfaction. The encounter had been more than a traffic stop. It had been a lesson in awareness, patience, and human behavior. She had demonstrated that assumptions could be challenged, that composure could influence perceptions, and that dignity could create meaningful change. She closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment. Even as she drifted towards sleep, she reflected on the power of quiet confidence. It was not always visible, and it did not always result in immediate recognition, but it had the ability to shift perceptions, to create understanding, and to leave a lasting impact. She had experienced that firsthand, and she knew it would guide her future interactions, both personal and professional. The day had ended with reflection, the lessons of patience, dignity, and quiet strength settling deeply within her. She had faced assumptions, subtle prejudice, and tension, and she had responded with clarity and composure. The officer had seen the truth of her character, and in that moment a small but meaningful shift had occurred. It was a victory not of confrontation, but of presence, awareness, and unwavering calm. Finally, as the night grew quiet, she allowed herself to rest fully, confident in the knowledge that composure and dignity were powerful tools. She had navigated a challenging encounter, reflected on its lessons, and emerged with a renewed understanding of patience, awareness, and quiet influence. The experience had left her stronger, wiser, and even more committed to leading with clarity, integrity, and respect, and in that quiet, reflective peace. She slept, ready to face the new day with the same calm strength and dignity that had guided her through every challenge, knowing that even the smallest encounters could leave a lasting impact.